Before I get into it, how many people before coming here have heard this term transmedia storytelling? Okay, good. Good. A third, 25% maybe. And I'm also going to talk about game strategy and how this would apply to the type of serious storytelling that many of you are involved with. Okay, but before I go, okay, see this gesture here? This is a universal emotion. When you achieve something, right? How many of you have had this feeling of, yes, right? I mean, she just got windows loaded, right? So, how many of you know that feeling, right? So let's all do this. Yes! All right? It's a great feeling, isn't it? Well, that's one of the feelings that you can engender in people through applying game strategy into your work. Now, it'd be really kind of hypocritical for me if I did this presentation and did not add some game strategy to it. So, I've got two bags here. One bag says biz cards. Guess what goes in there? Business cards, okay? Okay. Now, I'm going to be drawing three names out of the bag at the end of this. That's going to be our game panel, okay? The panel's going to have three questions at the end, and they're going to be hard. They're going to be hard. You're going to have to pay attention to this presentation. You, the whole audience, has a role. Okay, this is photography that makes a difference. This is game strategy that makes a difference. Okay, this event that you're attending is actually a fundraiser for the Blue Earth Alliance. Second bag has a dollar sign on it. If you have $1, if you have $5, if you have 50 cents, put it in the bag. If all three of our contestants answer their questions correctly, at the end, this money will go to the Blue Earth Alliance. Worthwhile? Should we all collaborate to help raise a little bit of extra funds for Blue Earth Alliance? Just say yes. I did it.
This is also really his new mailing list.
It's all about being transparent. All right. It's all about being transparent. Okay, so I'm going to go fast because we're really toward the end of the day. I know that we're looking forward to the cocktail hour. Following up on Adil's use of Google, I pulled up one of my favorite things, the Google Insights. And what you can see here in Google, and this is, I've made a comparison between the interest in term multi-platform, which you've heard here a few times today. That's the yellow line. Blue line is transmedia. So there's a lot of interest in this idea of transmedia storytelling. It's the money bag getting around. That's the one. That's the important one. Okay. Why might you be interested in this subject matter? Well, in a press release that's about a year and a half old from the U.S. Department of Education, they talked about grant funds for transmedia projects. Current awards for transmedia went to Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS to deliver transmedia content, including video and interactive online games and mobile apps, etc., to the tune of $27 million. Okay? Do I have your attention? Okay, that's a substantial amount of money allotted to specifically transmedia storytelling. So what is this? For those of you taking notes, Henry Jenkins, formerly of MIT, now down at UCLA, wrote a book came out about 6 years ago called Convergence Culture. And in it, he says, a transmedia story unfolds across multiple media platforms with each new content asset making a distinctive and valuable contribution to the whole. So is this just really simply a buzzword of the day for multi-platform? I personally don't think so. What I came up with is the way I like to talk about it is transmedia storytelling is a creative approach to or methodology for multimedia, multi-platform productions. Now some of the same things I talked about this morning related to like content marketing, convergence, economic, technological and cultural come into play here. But what's really fascinating about the transmedia concept is in the cultural convergence part, in which it focuses on the participatory nature. Now, we just haven't heard that from Scott. We heard Dan Green refer to this earlier, participation, engagement, as something you want to start thinking of right at the very beginning of your project. What's fascinating about the potential is how it empowers the collective intelligence, the ability of virtual communities to leverage the combined expertise of their members. Okay, so those of you that are maybe my age or older, which is a little bit north of 50, maybe we're like, this just sounds like a bunch of hokey pokey, right? But we're not making stories anymore just for us, right? We haven't been for a long time. And the younger generations are starting to expect this type of transmedia aesthetic in the content that they consume. So there are 7 key concepts. And my intent here is just to sort of introduce these ideas to you, and hopefully you'll go off on your own and do your own exploration. 7 key concepts. The story unfolds across multiple media platforms, with each part making a unique and valuable contribution to the whole. Each medium should do whatever it does best. A website will tell one part of the story better than, say, your iPod app or your iPad app, okay? That type of planning. At best, each part is self-contained enough to make it accessible on its own terms without the rest of the components. The vision needs to be consistent and unified. If it's redundant or self-contradicting, participants will recognize that. It should attract and can attract multiple audiences by using different approaches in different media to reach each group. The logic shifts from licensing to co-creation. And as we spoke earlier, it can form communities when it brings people together and gives them something to do. Now, the way that I like to illustrate what I believe is the transmedia storytelling experience is actually with the Santa mythology. Okay? So, we all know the Santa Claus story, basically, in one form or the other. But let's look at the different ways that one story has been told by participants in different media. So we can go all the way back to Clement Clarke Moore with The Night Before Christmas, It Was the Night Before Christmas. That's one variation of the Santa mythology. Of course, then there's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer story. And of course, we also have Buddy the Elf. Okay, these are all different variations on the Santa mythology. What do you think is the commonality between these 2 albums? All right? I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Under the Christmas Tree. They each recorded that, Twisted Sister and Andy Williams. Do you think that that is the same content adjusted for 2 different audiences? Absolutely. Okay. It's participatory in many different ways, including letters to Santa. Please leave my stocking full. All right? And then there's this one, slightly older audience. Dear Santa, bring CSS Mastery or the reindeer gets it. And then there's interpreting the Santa character in your own imaginative and creative ways. And then, of course, there's also telling the Santa story in terms of, the real world, in terms of reality. This is Santa's world in the North Pole in Finland. And then, of course, there's brand integration. Now, Wizard of Oz can be analyzed along the same lines, right? As a great pioneering transmedia story. How many people are you familiar with the fact that Frank Baum did not write all of the Oz books? He wrote like the first half, and then like the rest of the mythology was contributed by other authors. The central story is contributed to Sunday comics, toys, board games, amusement parks, etc. Oh, and a movie that maybe we've heard about, right? Star Wars, a universe worthy of devotion. It was a thriving transmedia experience for 30 years, even though George Lucas did not start out by calling it that. But he did open up Star Wars to sub-creators. Sub-creators have contributed to the canon. Extensions have continued outside of the films. Okay, so the films have been the major story, but other parts of the story have been told through other medium. So, for example, and I hope we're not surprised by this, but Chewbacca died. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and he died in one of the novels set after the films. And fans have been very active participants in Star Wars story. So, if this kind of has always existed, is very similar to what I talked about earlier, then what's the big deal today? Well, the big deal today is that we do have, this is kind of a map of it where the main story is here in the center, and then you have all of these different channels, platforms, what have you, to consider distributing the content, and as I talk about in the transmedia world, tailoring this content in certain ways because certain audiences are going to want certain parts of the story on certain channels. So there's actually ways in which you can begin to really take aspects of your stories and tailor them to reach perhaps certain types of demographics that maybe the main story is not going to reach. One of the things that makes the transmedia concept work, is, particularly in terms of participation, et cetera, is baking in the ideas from the start. And one of the ways you do that is you think of your story as a set of fractals. Okay, the main, in this case, look at the main trunk of this tree. That's your main story. What are the similar but related, what are the related but perhaps slightly different variations of that story that you can spin off for each platform where you might find different audience demographics? At this point, I usually go into a really cool video. So we don't have much time, but look up The Dark Knight Transmedia on YouTube. Scott's shaking his head. He's seen this. And it's pretty fascinating. It goes through the whole... What, Scott?
I made a phone call.
You did you? Oh, hell, let me go ahead and do at least the first few seconds of it, since you mentioned the phone call.
Why so serious? In the months leading up to the release of The Dark Knight, they scavenged for clues and found a big one typed out in the sky.
So a bunch of just writing. So without the phone number, there's this little message.
If you want to be a part of my crew, you're going to need to prove you're up to the challenge.
Players hit the streets dressed as their leader, and Gotham's...
All right, that's 18 minutes long. It's worth watching. I'm going to go ahead and cut to the end of the story. And I want to preface this by saying, look, this is a major Hollywood blockbuster movie with a built-in, geeky comic audience, okay? So they could have done virtually anything almost and had success with this. But what I want you to do is take a look at this, because this is all scalable. How can you use your imagination with the stories you're telling to apply some of these same approaches and techniques? So anyway, with Dark Knight, over 10 million participants in this experience, 75 countries, hundreds of web pages, interactive games, mobile phones, print, email. It was really totally a multi-platform distribution. But here's one of the cool things. So there were over 50 million Google searches for this. 55,000 videos tagged The Dark Knight. A bunch of blog posts on the day of premiere. What I find really fascinating is some of the YouTube videos reached 4 million views. Okay, these were the participants' videos. Look at the next line. The official trailer only had generated 100,000 views. This is what we're talking about leveraging the collective wisdom of the crowd in terms of the storytelling. Now, that gets me to the potential in terms of serious stories, right? I mean, photography that matters, etc. This is a definition I came up for transmedia activism. Storytelling that leverages the participatory and social networking aspects of transmedia to inspire community building around issues and causes and influences the community to take action. So how can we use these principles with our photo documentaries, for example, to help get even greater participation in telling the story, the same types of things that Scott was talking about. So, and, there's Coney 2012. And, when I first started seeing Coney 2012 roll out, I was like, yes, here we have a really cool example of this being used for something other than Hollywood entertainment. And then the creator had this pleasing himself naked on a street corner reaction to all the pressure. And I get it. I mean, I've almost been there. I've been that close, right? But I know there's a lot of criticism and concerns about Coney, both certainly with the organization itself. But what I would like to suggest is that this audience in particular, not lose sight of the trees for the forest or the forest for the trees. That actually the things and the techniques that they use are actually very valid. Starting from the type of story that they told on YouTube, the type of participation that they engendered across campuses, not just recently, but for years. The way that they extended the story, even to include things like the Coney bracelet, and then engaged their participants in storytelling. Even so, this was the recent, April 20th thing, a video from that. But then even Uganda got into the story. Okay, here's Uganda 2012 more than Coney 2012, which is kind of interesting because you get these really interesting checks and balances. There's something really, negative that maybe Uganda perceived as negative, and they did. Many of them did. They have the ability to come back in this world now with their own response to that story. It is their own response to the universe that Invisible Children created around the Coney story. So just because Invisible Children became questionable itself, does that make the tactics any less credible? And I think the answer is no. I think that the tactics are really worth paying a lot of attention to. So that's the transmedia storytelling component. And now I'd like to get into the game strategy because there's some interconnection between the two, okay? So one of the things that we recognized actually happened with this Florida landscaping project, which is that we created actually this interactive tutorial. And one of the things that we did was we attached a quiz to this tutorial, the landscaping quiz. And so if people went through this quiz and submitted, and they got all the questions right, they would get a certificate and they'd get a packet of Florida-friendly wildflower seeds, okay? So we launched this thing, and about 2 or 3 months later, we get a phone call from the Florida DEP saying, turn it off, all right? Because they could not keep up with the fulfillment, okay? People really like that, being challenged in that context to test themselves, okay? So this is a game mechanic built into a project that started as essentially a photo storytelling project. So, what professions and enterprises are utilizing game strategy? All of these and more, okay? Game strategy is now being used in real-world scenarios in medical schools and government agencies, and help train emergency response teams, and so on. So, you know, does that suggest that maybe we as storytellers should be paying attention to this? And I think the answer is yes. So, let's look at this, how game strategy inspires change. Okay, so this will be gaming by the numbers. 33 is the average game player age. Okay, it's not your typical, teenage, pimply-faced teen boy image that I think a lot of us have. 94% of girls under age 18, 94% game. 40% of gamers are women. 407 million hours per month now spent by Americans on games. 50% of organizations 50% is the number of organizations that will gamify innovation. 100 million to 1.6 billion is the predicted gamification growth by 2015. If you're sitting there in your chairs thinking, my boss will never ever let me do like game strategy with my work, well guess what? Your boss is likely somebody who plays games. 68% of executives report that they do. And there's an infinite way of using game strategy. So some terms, gamification, horrible term, turning something not a game into a game. What I prefer to focus on are game mechanics, the rules, the feedback loops, the time limits. Game dynamics relates to the how and the when that the rewards come. There are different I just kind of skated past that. Different game personalities that you can start to take into consideration when you're designing something. Transmedia storytelling, which we talked about. And then social games, and in this context, it's games based on social networks. So we're talking about Farmville and those types of things. I highly recommend reading Reality is Broken by Jamie McGonigal. Many people in the audience read this. This book is really fascinating. I'll share some aspects of what I learned from it. The reason that people play games is because they make us happy. Okay? An interesting reason that they do is that games are the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. Think about that, right? The voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. Yeah, you don't give yourself a flat tire on the way to work, right? Saying, hey, this is going to be fun as hell. See if I can make it work, right? No, but an unnecessary obstacle that people put themselves in front of every day is something like a golf course, right? You get this tiny little white ball that you have to get into a tiny little cup, and it's very far away from you. In between you and that hole are sand traps and trees and other things. Oh, you have this really, with a silly swing you have to do with a stick with a really heavy head. Oh, and by the way, you have to get there in the fewest amount of strokes, right? That's nothing but one unnecessary obstacle after another, and yet people love it, okay? So what's happening when we're playing games is that we're live focused, we get to experience power, heroics, we experience exhilaration, we have the satisfaction of, and in certain scenarios, the satisfaction of overcoming obstacles as teams. Often we enter, when we're playing games, an emotional state called flow, okay? It's also known as being in the zone, okay? Being in the moment, being in the groove. And it's actually very common to game design. In fact, one of the things that game designers try to build into their game strategy is the ability to keep people in a perfect state between boredom and anxiety. Okay? If it's too easy, you're bored. And if it's too hard, you give up. Okay? So game strategy kind of keeps you in that in-between place. So it's a very desirable emotional state. For most of us, it doesn't really happen as frequently in real life as we would like. It's why people do turn to the social games like the Zynga games or Angry Birds. In fact, there's something that's called now accomplishment gratification. Just out of curiosity, how many people have games on their iPhones or whatever? Okay, some of you are doing this, right? You don't have to be ashamed. I saw one woman out there. Because 40% of you play games, okay? Accomplishment gratification is why people turn to this. What are the implications? Why are medical schools using this? Why are government agencies using game strategy, etc.? It's because it leads to deeper engagement, leads to greater message retention, drives action, encourages sharing, heightens loyalty, increases time on site, generates content, scores and things like that get shared is considered content. How have many of us already experienced game strategy? Okay, how many of you have LinkedIn accounts? Okay, most of you, right? How many of you went through and did everything you could so that little progress bar said 100%? You've been gamed, okay? You recognize that, right? That's a game mechanic. Okay, the Ford Fusion dashboard. All right, compete against your neighbors to be more green, right? The more leaves you have there, the more fuel efficiently that you're driving. Nike, how many of you are familiar? Anybody using Nike Plus? One hand in the back, okay? Two hands here. Okay, that's between your iPhone or your iPod and a sensor in the shoe, you can track your runs, you can track your course. Huge online community based around gamifying running. And then some like scavenger platform, which basically offers discounts and rewards when you do certain achievements at different like restaurants and sites and things like that when you're traveling. What's really fascinating, how many people have seen the Inside Disaster Interactive? And you folks from Canada, who produced this? Do you guys, anybody know, recognize this? There's somebody in Toronto, I forget the agency's name. But it's a really fascinating way of exploring the Haitian earthquake disaster. And what they've done is they've provided you with the ability to experience that disaster as either a survivor, an aid worker, or a journalist. And you make a choice of which way you want to go, and you start the experience. And as you walk through the experience, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into this. As you go through the experience, you're given choices to make, just as you would as a journalist in the field covering this story. So how are we on time?
Well, you need a few more minutes, and we'll grant you a few more minutes.
Well, that's my freaking program, so what the heck, All right, so. Did I have this? I thought I had this queued up. Did it go? All right, so it was queued up, but I'll go back into it. So, inside disaster, and start the experience as a journalist. So nobody's seen this before? We have a couple people. Sorry, I had this already queued up before, so It's flash-based. It's coming.
24 hours after a massive earthquake reduced the Haitian capital of Port-au-Prince to rubble, you arrive in the neighboring Dominican Republic with a mission. Create a 2-minute feature story on the disaster for a major network. Your job is to dig deeper than the stand-up journalists and find the truth. Yes, minutes are a lifetime on network news. After 6 hours on a single-lane road, you arrive at the Haitian border. As you cross into Haiti, you get a glimpse of the horror that you are about to encounter.
Okay, so now I'm a freelance journalist, and my mission, it says, is to create a 2-minute feature story on the earthquake for a region network. Enter Port-au-Prince.
12 hours after landing, you arrive exhausted at the epicenter of the disaster, the city that was once Port-au-Prince.
So it asks you to make another, well, in this case, internet security.
You make your way to the Canadian Embassy and join the other journalists and relief workers there.
And it goes on like that. It's asking you to make choices. At a certain point, well, here's a point. Accept that you are exhausted and in need of rest. Quickly follow your story with the other journalists, or accept the hardship and danger of heading out onto the streets of Port-au-Prince to follow a story about what's happening right now. So now it's giving you this option to take one of two different paths, to choose one of two different paths. So this is a pretty fascinating example of game mechanics and game strategy being worked into a serious story. And I think that we have to look at this very carefully, because I can appreciate, as much as I think all of you, the meaning and the resonance of a highly emotionally laden story like what Scott showed us about Vlad, right? But what if, okay, in association with a really meaningful video story like what he told, there is a way for you to experience what it would be like through this type of interaction to be making the choices about whether I can afford medication for my loved one or I can't. And looking at the repercussions of each one of your decisions, okay? I'm putting that out there as a what if. What if that type of story that Scott showed had also in association with this type of experience? So that's game strategy in terms of an example of it being used to tell a journalistic story. And so now we get to go into our game panel scenario here. So I'm going to draw three cards. Okay, you're going to come down here and sit in the front chairs. All right, so one is Nicole. I should be doing it this way, shouldn't I? Nicole, come on down. Stacy, come on down. I hope you guys are paying attention, because these questions are going to be hard. And Lauren from Western Washington University. Oh, Nicole Rain. That's Nicole Rain. And then we have Stacy. This is Stacy, and do we have Lauren? Oh, I'm sorry, there's me, Lauren. Lauren McClanahan.
Well, she might have been right here.
All right, well, scare her away. Oh, by the way, all of our contestants will get a really valuable, very treasured thing, an original One World Journey. Wow. Tom Trimbath. All right, our own Langley Tom Trimbath. Oops. Wow, we got some nice donations here. Okay, so Nicole, the first question is, the Langley Center for New Media is located where?
Langley, Washington.
Yay! That's one down. If any of these folks look like they're stumbling, okay, shout out, because we want this to go to Blue Alliance. Okay. Next question for Stacy. Okay.
Okay.
You ready? True or false? Whidbey Island is an island. Think about it, don't rush. True. Yay! Tom?
Yeah.
Blue Earth Alliance is about photography that makes a, this is a tough one.
Oh, say that again, please. Say that
Blue
again.
Earth Alliance is about photography that makes a
Difference.
Yay! So thank you. By participating in this and with the audience's help, we have raised some really nice cash together collaboratively to help the cause of Blue Earth Alliance. Thank you guys very much for your time.